call this work session order. This work session deals with Heritage Land Bank. Let's go around the table and identify ourselves for the record.
Eric Croft.
Felix Rivera.
Zig Training.
Forrest Dunbar. Pete Peterson.
John Weddleton.
Barbara Jones, clerk.
Okay. And administration. Who's representing administration?
Robin Ward, Executive Director of Herirtage Land Bank.
Nicole Jones, Overland Management Officer.
Okay, we've got some amendments in front of us. So let's see. Eric, you want to start with yours first? Then we'll go to Wilton's. Then we'll go to Chris's if you don't mind in that order since we're in front of us. Eric, you want to go through your amendments first?
Yeah, so there's just the one, but then I had Kathy Gleason from the Turnpike Community Council. So we have the 1A and 1B that are the what I addressed at the meeting about the parcels at the end of the runway. I guess I'd like to hear reaction from Robin on it, and that might help frame it more.
Well, we're reading.
Robin, have you seen it yet?
It's out for the first time, so let us run through it just real
Okay.
quickly, please.
No problem. Let's give her a minute. She's fast.
So sweet. She was California country.
To start out with, just to preface some of our discussions here today, Heritage Land Bank has a dedicated fund. We actually raise revenues every year by our permits, leases, and so on. And a portion of that money goes into operations every year to manage these properties. So today, Heritage Land Bank has 2 full-time land management officers and a dedicated fund to be able to manage our uncommitted space. If it's not committed under a lease, we manage it as public open space. And we are the ones who respond. If there is a complaint, a call, there's a campfire, there's trash that's been dumped, there's invasive species, and so on. We do have the management team that can manage that, and we also have funds available to be able to manage it. So I just want to let you know that we do have the opportunity and the commitment and the responsibility today to manage any of the uncommitted properties as public open space.
This was at the request of the Turnpike Community Council, so if I can have Kathy just describe real quickly, but basically it transfers to parks and then the Clitheroe Park to where?
Well, that would be up to the Heritage Land Bank, Kathy Gleason, Turnpike Community Council, acting president. Thank you, Assemblyman Trump. That would be up to the Heritage Land Bank and the Clitheroe Center to determine what kind of management and leasing requirements and conditions would put on that. That's not what the Community Council is asking for as part of the land to be transferred to the Municipal Parks Department. And I do have a handout, if I could distribute. It's kind of a summary of our original comment letter. And so your amendment number 1 actually comes directly out of our original comment letter that we did send to the Heritage Land Bank in April. So it's just the areas that are in green that would be shown on exhibit. Let me find the exhibit of the handout. It's the draft land use plan map. So it's exhibit B. So it would be the areas of HLB property in green that's actually west of the north-south runway. It's not quite at the end of the east-west runway. The just to clarify. And to address Ms. Ward's comment, while we appreciate HLB taking very good care of that land all these years, for 20 years, our council has been asking if these parcels be transferred between, to the Parks Department because they are being used as parks. They have been for decades now. And the portion of the coastal trail runs through it, portions of the Sisson Loop Trail run through it, and of course it's green belt as well on both sides. And I don't think that we would recommend every other dedicated park in town being used as park by the public be transferred to HLP because they have the funds to manage it. I mean, if we get this transferred to the Parks Department with the purpose of giving it dedicated parkland protection, that takes it off the table for HLB to potentially lease it to another entity, public or private, to sell it. And so that's really what the council has been looking for long-term, is permanent protection of this land. And I think its highest and best use and most appropriate management authority should be the Parks Department.
So attachment B had the blacked out part, which has both blue and green.
Yeah, that's kind of confusing because the original draft land use plan map had the areas in black shown as potentially being traded to the airport, potential airport expansion land. Since that first draft came out, we have dialogue with the planning department. The planning department has dialogue with the planning and zoning commission. The planning department has dialogue with the airport. The airport assured them they have no desire to acquire that land anymore, and that's what I show on my handout in Exhibit C, is the most recent airport master plan update that shows no acquisition or any kind of development proposed whatsoever in that HLB land. They made it very clear to the planning department they no longer want that land, they don't need it, and so as an amendment to that very first draft plan, that map, they outlined that in black for the Planning and Zoning Commission to look at and actually make an amendment in that issue response that I also have copies of as attachments in here. So that's the only reason why that's in black.
On which portion is Cliff Room?
So the Cliff Road Center on that map is shown in blue within that area.
And of the tracks for the Heritage Land Bank, is it trying to map the two onto each other? Do you know, Robin, which of the tracks we're talking about here is Cliff Row and?
Robin, I assume it's going to take a while for you guys to develop a position on this amendment.
Well, yeah, it would be helpful if we had a little more time to work on it, but I would like maybe John to respond. I mean, it's one thing to transfer it, but it has to be requested by Parks and Rec for transfer.
John?
I think everybody understands, how the property currently exists. I personally don't see a need to transfer it. It's already being, used as people discuss, and the trail and everything like that, but I don't really see the need to do the transfer. They have the resources and the people that actually deal with the stuff. We're pretty limited in our capacity based on what we currently have, and we're going to have other examples for discussion as well. They're the land managers. We're stewards of it on their behalf as well. But should something else come up, where there may be a long-term use or a need or whatever, I don't think HOB should be hamstrung if there's an opportunity or a need.
Do you own?
Eric?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should go through. So the rest of the parts of the trail, though, are under parks, right? Or the coastal trail.
Well, the trail, yeah. The trail developers.
But does HLB have that land, or do you? Or I know you manage the trail, but who owns the land under it and around it?
Portions of both.
And part of the airport.
Is that all, Eric? I'm going to go to Forrest next.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Forrester?
I was wondering if there's anybody here from planning that could speak to what Kathy just said, that the airport has told us that they don't anticipate ever using this. Is there anybody here from planning to speak to that?
Chris Schutte, Office of Economic and Community Development. I am reluctant to agree with it, no offense, Kathy, because I have not received or seen that document, but that doesn't mean that it has not been transmitted, and I would, of course, like to follow up with the department to provide you that answer. But at first blush, everything else about the dialogues that have occurred between planning and Turnagain Council and others, and the airport even, about the role of the lands around the airport as it relates to the land use plan map is absolutely true. The abandonment of an interest in these, I have not heard, but it's possible that it's true as well. I just would like to verify before I commit to that statement.
I'd like to.
We have
I'd like to
Tuesday.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chris, I'd like to
I'll do it
hear
right now.
from planning kind of the details of what that back and forth looks like.
You bet.
The captain stuff.
Yes, Tim.
Yeah, how about the city and the potential of expansion of Cleveland? I know they've been kicking it around, but I don't think there's any firm plans.
Through Chair, Assemblyman Steele, that is true. There are, they've been doing environmental work, they've been doing some planning work, they have a 4-acre grant to start that due diligence, and they are working on it right now. It would be expanded, the actual site where Clitheroe is, and a portion of the old compost facility would be incorporated in a new campus.
But I think Kathy told me those were not that was not the area that she was concerned with.
That's not the area that Turnagain Community Council wants to transfer to Parks and Recreation.
Is that all, Tim? Sure. I've got more in line. John, and then Chris.
I just want to comment on something that Kathy said. Maybe Dean will weigh in, but even if you have dedicated parkland, the city can use it for another municipal purpose. Like the fire station, Rattle Creek Park was not dedicated to park. That could have been used for a fire station. And the city can also do a lease on the park, would have to go to a vote, but you can do a series of short-term permits to get around that requirement with park. So you don't get the protection we often hope for in some dedicated park. You may be able to start.
Okay, well, certainly, and we could say that about any park in Anchorage.
Exactly.
So I think that that's not likely to happen because that land has been used by the public for recreational and open space purposes. It's isolated from everything else, and I think that's remote. But you know what? We'll take that risk
No, I
as
just-
council.
I just want to make sure that was understood. A lot of people think dedication means park.
Sure. Whatever the municipal code is.
Is that all, John?
Yes, thank you.
Chris?
I'm going to play the new assembly person. I don't really know. What is the threat to the coastal trail in this scenario?
Through the Chair,
Robin.
Constance, are you talking, is there currently a threat to it?
For the next 25 years. I mean, let's think long.
We do not believe that there is a threat. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. We have an MOU between Parks and the state of Alaska for the Anchorage Coastal Wildlife Refuge and HLB.
So every year we get together with the state of Alaska and look at how those areas are being managed. We can certainly provide maps of which Parks and Rec parcels and which HLB parcels are underneath that management agreement, and we can certainly address any issues that come up with management in the past. There is language for buffer that we, in our plan, we adhere to all the currently adopted planning documents, so that wouldn't be at risk. There's a few other things to highlight with regard to this. We have several leases and land use permits that we manage in our department, including the Tesoro Alaska pipeline, access from the airport to get to some of their I don't remember the details currently, but we have a land use permit for access to the airport, and we also have the FAA lease that's out there. So we have several different contracts that we're managing, and it's likely that those will be best managed through the real estate department.
Anything else, Chris? Tim?
Yeah, just one last item. I think what I've heard from Turnagain Community Council and others is the fear factor. That we've got a good thing going, we've got the land, and they don't want to be surprised or a project that comes up, a land trade that comes up, or something that degrades the value. I think that's a concern. Anything we need to do to protect that. I hate to give Parks and Rec more work in terms of management. If that does that job, then that's the best way to do it. But it would require another step to take it to the park to do that trade or do something. So it doesn't.
Thank you, Tim Forrest, and then Eric.
Yeah, last meeting you approved the lease on a beacon. I'm trying, was that, I'm trying to remember, was that 4032 where that beacon was?
That's on
40334, right.
But it is on these parcels.
Exactly.
How would that beacon be impacted by this action, if at all?
I think that what Trinidad Community Council is looking at is closer to the coastal trail, so it shouldn't impact them.
So it's not on these parcels?
It is on those parcels. Everything we're talking about is on these parcels. These are very large parcels.
So my point is, passing this amendment, for example, won't impact that lease at all.
He's worried about this. If we pass this amendment, it would impact the lease.
Beacons are one of the questions.
There's the provision that we're limited in how we do leases on park land, and we have to do those and things. Is that,
Then it would have impacted them. That would have to go to a vote of the people because it is a long-term lease.
so it's,
Eric?
yeah, just following up on, well, a couple of different comments, Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Constant in particular. It's a continuum of protection, right? We can do anything, even with this designation, there could be uses that were not compatible with park and or trail. It just becomes harder to do when you do this. It just becomes, you add another step, and it is a declaration of your intent for this parcel, what you want to do. Again, the way Mr. Rada put it, why would we limit their options? That's what I'd like to do, is limit the options in this area for certain reasons, because I want it to retain that. Whether it's exactly this approach or not, I don't know, but I think for Heritage Land Bank's overall plan, I would like to constrain, not out of a lack of trust of any particular person or entity, but because I want it to continue to be, and Turnagain wants it to continue to be, and I think most of Anchorage wants to continue to be, primarily this use.
Pete? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is currently Heritage Land Bank land. It's not designated to be parkland.
No.
And so if we dedicated it to be parkland, then the Parks Department would manage it. What if we just designated it to be parkland?
So who has management authority? Today, Heritage Land Bank has management authority. So you're talking about transferring management authority, which puts the responsibility and the funding for any of the management and staff time on Parks and Rec.
Even if it's just designated, not dedicated?
Doesn't this designate, not dedicate? I'm sorry, but just
Go ahead, Eric.
It said the draft plan designates. Kathy, which is this doing? Is it become permanently dedicated park?
The Turnagain Community Council request is for the Heritage Land Bank plan to put in their 5-year plan the intent to initiate the discussion about transferring the parcels in green on that draft land use plan map of the HLB lands west of the airport, so that we can discuss and ultimately with the intent of having all of that land in green as the draft land use plan that's about ready to go before your body for approval. Planning and Zoning Commission approved it last Monday with that green on it.
Short of dedicated or designated?
Okay, well, absolutely dedicated.
Thanks.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah. So, Robin, I mean, my intent, can we say in this document, Heritage Land Bank manages it, but we are telling you part of the intent is to preserve the trail. So however you I'm not so concerned which one of the two of you has day-to-day management as I am that we clearly state in this and in other documents that it's to be used while preserving the coastal trail. Does that have much effect?
It certainly will have effect because it goes in our plan and we try and follow our plan.
And you're saying that you want to Turnigan wants it dedicated.
Well, absolutely, and a couple of points. It's not just the coastal trail, it's also sections of the Sisson Loop Trail, and it's all the greenbelt municipally owned land between the airport, which is pretty well cleared, all of their land up to the property line in that area, a majority of it. So we need the remaining municipal land east of the trail to be retained as part of the open space parkland dedicated preservation. So don't get hung up on just protecting the park. We're asking for protection of that, all that area that's being used for park, recreation, and open space purposes, land that belongs to the municipality, bumped up against a highly incompatible land use. So any green belt that we can should be reserved between the airport property line and the municipal property line.
Okay, and the question, another semi-member. Chris?
Yeah, I'm curious what, since we've heard that the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the land use plan map and that document's coming before us, what opportunities do we have in that document to establish a clear message short of this? Is there anything we can do with that map?
I think I'll
Robin?
let Chris answer that, I'm not sure.
Chris?
So the short answer is no. It does not direct the body to do anything. The land use plan update, as Kathy indicated, does identify areas that should functionally remain parks or open space. However, unless there were changes on Monday, I don't believe that the plan ever specifically calls for dedication, which is a secondary action to take. We have a balance of dedicated parkland and undedicated parks that we manage in the Parks and Rec inventory, but the plan does not specify dedication.
And this does. I mean, that's what Turnigan's been fighting for, and so that would be the effect.
John, what would the cost be if we designate it? If that comes into your area, then there's a cost for taxpayers to maintain the property. Do you have any idea what it would cost to do that?
Some of that is hypothetical because you don't know necessarily what the vision would be for expanded use of the property, amenities, accessibility. There's all kinds of things that can come into play. We often get requests to add this or add that. Well, this could turn out to be one of those situations where somebody decides they want to have some sort of an overlook or they want, some other elements in there. So right now, we're not staffed or equipped to continue to pull on more responsibilities. It just spreads us out a little bit further.
Robin, can you get us your position from administration by Tuesday? I don't think you can give us your position now, but by Tuesday, before it comes in front of us, we need to have your written, view on this, if you would, please, before you start to go over. Yes, Chris?
I just know I have out there a lot, several times a week, and there are bridges, ones that we just replaced, that was a substantial municipal parking expense that the voters bonded for, and benches all along the way within that zone. And so it seems to me already the amenities are on parks to be there and be maintained. And so the argument that we're going to be increasing the burden on parks from the idea of amenities seems like we're already making massive investment in that zone that is perhaps under threat if there's some change in policy that comes in the short term and we just spent, $500,000 on that bridge? Or $300,000? And so, we are already managing it as a park. With parks.
John?
Just two comments, but one is I'm not comfortable with doing anything based on the draft of a plan we haven't adopted yet. I mean, this is still in play. And I know this kind of just refers to something there, but there's a number of things that we've looked at and some stuff coming at us that when we see this and it says, the draft 2040 land use plan map, so that's just a draft we haven't approved it. To me, we should not be basing our decisions on something that could be substantially different after we vote on it. And then I guess the dedication, now, HLBU was dedicated, we dedicated. So, I mean, if it were transferred to parks, the dedication is a whole separate issue, then it's on us.
But it's only somebody can dedicate.
Right, so it wouldn't be part of your, if it's in your plan, it doesn't really mean anything, that particular aspect.
To undedicated, do you have to take a vote?
Yes, got to go to the vote of public.
No.
No, that's not true.
Undedicated. Got to go to the vote of public.
We can dedicate.
About 16%, I think.
I want to move on. We've got treasury amendments we need to deal with. The next one is from Knowlton LaFrance. I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, got a handful of amendments here. The first one regards parcels that are just east of Potter Marsh, east that follow the old Seward Highway. And those have been in the Potter Valley land use plan. And the Potter Valley land use analysis for a long time. That blue book over there. So it's not really a new idea. This has been an idea for, I think, well over a decade. So it's really just to recognize something that is already city policy within HLG plan. So that's the broad scheme there. Nancy Pease has been very carefully involved in this, so we invite her to make a few comments.
Go ahead.
All right, yeah.
Yes, the importance, the Heritage Land Bank, these lands are essentially in sort of a stasis. There's nothing happening to them now. They're continuing to funnel their waters down into Potter Marsh, and the wildlife use them, and that's great. That's the intended function. That's what's called for in this plan, which was adopted in 1999. But leaving them under Heritage Land Bank management is hindering the long-term goals of municipal watershed protection and protection for Potter Marsh. And the reason is that twofold. One, these are adjoin the marsh. There are additional large tracts up the hill, and by large tracts I mean 120 acres in private ownership and 92 acres that GCI owned, and they may be wanting to do something with it now. Those private parcels have a lot of tributaries and watershed value too, but they're isolated from the marsh by this strip of HLB land. HLB land has the skirt that separates those valuable watershed lands from the marsh. And so having them put into conservation status, managed by parks, then creates contiguity. And we've heard from the Great Land Trust that when you're looking to conserve watershed, there's a desire to have contiguity. There's not an interest in little isolated islands of conservation land or watershed land. So this provides that contiguity. So that's part of the reason. And then the other reason is, over the decades that Granite Creek Community Council has advocated for this transfer, we get mixed signals from Heritage Land Bank land. And even in their latest letter to the Assembly, they didn't mention 55 of the acres. 55 of the acres, part of which will be needed for road realignment. And so there's some commitment there to conservation status for the long term, but it doesn't appear to us that there's adequate commitment. And then with regard to the 55 acres, there is an intent at some point to bring a road, to realign some roads in there. And that's provided for in this plan. It's anticipated to take about 8 acres out of the 55 acres. But when Heritage Land Bank disposes of land in other instances, they will put in a note for a road right-of-way or an easement. And so that could be done at this time. But it's important to move ahead, put this into parks with conservation as its clear intent in order to achieve the long-term watershed protection.
John, something else?
Well, I guess can I direct a question to Rob? I guess two questions. One, the second one would be your comments on this. And the first one, can HLB put it in conservation status?
Yes, through the chair, Assemblyman Whittleton. HOB is the designated repository for all conservation easements. We are the only department that manages conservation easements. But we would not put a conservation easement on it normally unless we were ready to sell mitigation credits, because that's how we raise the money to be able to manage in perpetuity those conservation easements. So normally we manage it for watershed up until a point where we do need some kind of mitigation credits, and that's the point in time that we normally record a conservation easement against a piece of property.
Would these properties qualify for your wetland mitigation credits?
We'd have to look, we haven't done any wetlands delineation on these, so we would have to check with the Corps of Engineers.
Mr. Francis, do you want to add to it? John, do you want to go on to any more discussion on this, or? We'll see if there's assembly questions.
Yeah, I don't think there is a point in putting these in the wetlands mitigation lineup. Heritage Land Bank already has 5 or 6 or 7 properties that they've already identified for wetlands mitigation. So that indicates to me that the value on these is probably relatively low, and therefore they're not likely to get any money income for the municipality in the near term. In the meantime, the big picture depends on commitment to conservation status through these lands.
Anything else, John? Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these are steep slopes. This is not buildable land. Is that correct?
These are, not only is there slopes, but there's, as you said, they're very wet. There's many tributaries. So right now we're managing those for watershed. And I'm not quite sure what conservation status means unless you put a conservation easement on it. But we manage it today for public open space, but with wetlands and watershed.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this from the body? Robert, can you give us administration's view by Tuesday on this?
I will.
We appreciate that. Chris? Your next up, please.
There were 2 more.
Yeah, there's.
Okay.
Go into 2 more.
Okay, go ahead, John. Sorry, you're on 3 and 4 now?
3 more, I think I have 2. Yours actually, so this is one of the.
You got 2, 3, and
There is a 4 that I laid on the table, but we can talk about that.
okay, I just want to make sure you have time for.
Okay, I'll talk about that. Okay, this is, Chugach State Park access is a big deal, and as you all know that part of the rec service area expansion failed, but there is still an ongoing need for more and better access. The Chugach State Park is south of Glen Alps, and Heritage Land Bank has some parcels that could provide access or could be traded for access or be part of an access package. So this one just addresses those parcels. So it adds a new section under potential project that kind of highlights these parcels as useful for increasing Chugach State Park access.
That's for us, sir.
John, I mean, I went to many of your presentations on your initiative, which I was very supportive of, and we asked people in this area if they would help us pay for this kind of access, and they said no. Isn't this effectively us, if we were trading assets and land that we hold, isn't this kind of us paying for that without getting any, they just told us they wouldn't pay for it. Aren't we basically, you're asking us to subsidize it?
No, I agree with your angst and haven't done it. No, what this would be more likely to do is be able to help us work with the state, where the state can provide access, which they also do, obviously. Let out to the prospect we've done there, so it might be a land trade or just providing access to that state land.
But there would be state monies that would.
That's what we look for, and I know that both failed now, that at some point that area will be coming to us and saying, please add us to Park and Rec, we've got a problem. So that was a short term, which is sometime in the future, they will be part of our service area. And we need to plan for this. We can't lose any opportunity to create access to that park, because once it's gone, it's gone. So just providing easements, they may not be managed, but they're legally there, should they be able to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Go ahead, John.
Nancy, speak.
Yeah, there's one very important distinction between what Mr. Wells and Mr. France are asking for and what HLB has proposed. The original language, they identified they acknowledged these parcels, but they said exchange, land exchange will be the mechanism. And the language in this amendment provides for exchange, easement disposals, or other agreements with the state or other entities. So it attempts to provide a menu of options, because land exchanges are expensive and arduous, and so this
creates greater flexibility. That's a really important distinction between this amendment and what HLB had proposed.
John, anything else?
No, but thank you.
Just follow up. I'm sorry. So could I hear from the administration a little bit about actually both of the ones we just talked about? But it sounds like what was just described to us sounds like fairly reasonable. I mean, is there any reason? But I seem to recall you guys opposing this. Maybe I'm misremembering. There being an email where you were displeased with this amendment.
Frankly, I don't think we have a big problem with the changed language. We did leave it in the 5-year plan, however, because right now it doesn't appear that if we put it in the 1-year plan, those are the things we actively work on. And today, at least, we're not getting that kind of cooperation from Chugach State Park.
So I'm not being misunderstanding what we're doing here. You're working on the 5-year plan.
We are, but there are sections of the plan.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'd just like to be sure the administration gives us a front of view before we vote on all the amendments. John, anything else?
Amendment 3. And this regards a parcel that is, I think, somewhat surplus. The water utility put a tank there near Golden View, and there's a little bit left that could be used. I mean, I think it was proposed for disposal. We're saying, well, maybe not. Let's look at it for possible other purposes. And once again, I would like the opportunity to have
Go ahead.
This, again, is an attempt to provide the municipality with a toolkit for watershed preservation and parkland and access to parkland. And rather than just put this parcel up, this language that we're proposing through Assemblyman Weddleton identifies some of the values of it and puts on the table the possibility of exchange or revenue generation specifically geared to the land use needs in this area. Otter Creek is in a very skinny little green belt, which is basically a canyon, and only the bottom of it, partway up the sides, is preserved. So it's not well preserved. The municipality does have an adopted intent to expand greenbelt corridors, so that would be one. And then the other is all the tributaries, again, that come down into Potter Marsh across private land. If those developers or those private landowners get ready to develop, the municipality might be able to sell and exchange or, to work together with the goals of watershed and greenbelt protection. So that's what this
Questions from Assembly members? Don't appear to be. Thank you. John, anything else?
I actually have a amendment 4, and this just came about following email discussions with Robin, and it just moved a project from one section to the other, and I apologize. I think we put it from, you saw this, right? You had recommended moving something, I think, from disposal to transfer in one of your emails. I said, okay, we'll do that. And I apologize to everyone. I took this as a recommendation from.
Robin, you got that odd look on your face. Do you remember getting this?
Yeah, I don't have anything in front of me, so I remember talking about it, but I don't remember all the
Okay,
specifics.
this would be simple enough to wait until Tuesday. I'll make sure I send it to you again.
We should wait on everybody so they can have time to weigh in on it.
We'll do so. Thank you.
Is that all, sir?
Yes, I am done.
Chris?
All right. So I have an amendment here. It amends 2 sections of the plan. One is the 1-year plan and one is the 5-year. And the intent is to allow for an agricultural use for the old native hospital site. That in conversations with Nancy and the homeless team upstairs, we were trying to come up with innovative uses, ways to help people get up and out of that trap that is set up in that area. And one thought is to create an urban farm. And we're in discussions with Danny Constantine, who's former USDA Rural Affairs Director, with Cookland Housing Authority, South Central Foundation, Rural CAF, with APU's Kellogg Farm, and with Cameron Willingham, who's the vertical farming guru up here. And the theory is that if we can find a better use for that land, maybe we'll do something positive and change some people's lives. And work tends to be a high value. And if you remember in the work we've done in the homeless committee, there are kind of those 3 populations we're dealing with. And that bell. The first group is the people who just need short-term help because they can be back on their feet. The middle group, this project will target, and then the last group are the kind of severe chronic folks that we have tons of resources for. That middle group, not a lot of resources. We can help them get on their feet doing projects that might relate to planting or harvesting or marketing or accounting relative to a farm. We think we can do something great. I've worked with the administration. This language doesn't say this land will be used for that, it's may be used for that. And it's just a way of giving affirmation to the public that something good is coming, that we're going to work to a solution. The administration added some language, you'll see Amendment 1A. That is to ensure that the land is contaminant-free, and so that is going to be investigated in the first year. And then over the course of the 5-year plan, a proposal and an implementation will be developed to make it work if it's feasible, if it's a reasonable plan, if all the ifs add up. So that's the amendment.
But urban farm is not urban campsite.
No.
I just want to make sure because the media is going to spin it differently, believe me.
No, and we're really prepared to do this as a farm. We've been in discussions with folks like the Peony Growers Guild to put in a demonstration farm, discussions even with the folks who buy plants for all of the parks in the downtown that aren't coming from the Salt Creek greenhouse. Then discussions about providing food for the downtown restaurants. I've talked to several of the owners of restaurants that are interested in participating, help fund it. It's going to be a farm, not a residence.
Okay. Mr. Prince, then you have your hand up first. It's open, sir.
I guess I have two questions. So one is this last word for disposal accordingly. What is that?
Say again.
You say the last word in your amendment here. You have the word for disposal accordingly. What is that?
So that would be a Robin question. That's their amendment. So.
Yes, Ms. Ford.
Mr. Middleton, we want to be able to, we're concerned about contamination. There's already been identified some contamination. And if it does surface in the form of either vapors or whatever, we want to make sure that whatever use we put on there, even if it's temporary and short term, doesn't pose a risk. In other words, if we're just going to store trailers there, that may not pose a risk. But if we're going to have people on the site, that may pose a risk. So all we're saying is we want to assess it according to whatever short-term or long-term use would be on it.
Well, why is not a great location for something, a building, homes? Is there something wrong?
There are several things. We do have contaminations. The biggest issue there is the seismic zone. The larger parcel, almost all of that is in a slide area. It's a number 5 seismic zone. So that probably shouldn't take any structures. It would take a lot of engineering to put a structure on that site. And right now it's zone PLI, so there's not a lot of structures other than municipal use that we can put there unless we rezone it.
Walter, in the past, John, we've had a lot of communities concerned about what we put on there because many of them feel the spirits of the people that passed away are still there. So they're concerned about the use of the property. Because I bet you this numerous times over the years.
In discussions with Rural Cap and with South Central Foundation, one element of the farm would be a tribal element with kind of native botanicals that have spiritual connections and a very positive element. And a name that we came up with for the concept, and I can't pronounce it, it's in Dena'ina, but it means the place where we save ourselves. And there's kind of an aspect to it of kind of self-directed healing. And I'm doing everything I can to plant a flag down there that we got something else in this land than just what we've done for the last 50 years.
Of course. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love the idea, I love the project. I'm curious about some of the language. So on page 2 here, it says this use is permitted. Is that a statement of fact, or is that a statement of what things will be after this amendment passes? And if it's a statement of what the current permitting is, then I'm kind of curious why we need this. If we can already do this.
So I can answer that. That language doesn't exist right now, and it's arguable whether it is allowed or not. And it probably is allowed, but this is a statement of position that it is an allowed use if the determination is made that it's a use that is common sense, reasonable, healthy, among all of the ifs, if it adds up. And we leave that to the hands of the administration in the language as it's written. We don't take that in the assembly with this language. We just say it is an allowed use if it fits.
Your question is no?
No, I guess I'm curious, just for my own edification, why would it be permitted or not permitted? What is it about this land that would allow it to be permitted or not a permitted use?
It would be zoning, contamination, and soils.
On the zoning issue specifically, he says PLI.
PLI,
So in general, can we farm on PLI? I'm curious.
probably.
I think we passed an ordinance recently that could farm on.
We can put
Farmers market.
farmers markets. if we talk.
You can have,
That's part of the plan.
Okay.
I've always been told that we were kind of holding that chunk of land for a highway to highway connection. Is that not true?
How many goods at all was that?
Can I speak to that? I would just add, we have intended this project to not put a structural element on the land, so that should a higher or better use of the land come along and the argument be made, then it can be done. And so the theory isn't to, stop anything positive. I mean, a farm can be, paved over. It's happening in the Palmer area every day. And so we really contemplated that, and we don't intend to try to block.
My colleagues, any more questions? Eric, Forrest, Felix, anything? Sorry. Forrest, anything?
No.
I have a question for the parks guys, separate from these questions. Two things. Have we ever contemplated like a park permit? Like a state park that has a parking permit, and not that we want to make our parks, we have to pay to get into them, but that people could actually actively buy a permit that they as a citizen would have an investment, because a lot of people would. And then the second question is, can we get a cell tower out by the end of that runway? Because it's a dead zone, and people are out there every single day, and there are booths out there, and it's a bit scary if you can't make a phone call. So,
What runway?
what, Warren's
HLB
What are we talking
at
about?
the end of the runway.
We did?
We did.
It is.
Kincaid Tower should be streaming in about a month.
Okay.
About a month, about one more month.
I'm like, it is dead out there. Okay.
Just before you came on the body, Robert, can you give us your position on this?
We certainly will. We'll have it, I'll distribute it on
We'd like it in
Monday.
writing.
What's that?
I'll distribute our
Thank you.
response on Monday.
Anything else in mind? Not this work session.